It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a polite phone call behind velvet curtains. It was a lawsuit. And the moment it landed, everything cracked. Because when George Clooney sues you, not tweets, not hints, not distances himself quietly, but sues you, the message is brutal and unmistakable. This has gone too far. And suddenly, the fairy tale around Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and their glossy California philanthropy wasn't shimmering anymore. It was shaking, violently. Behind closed doors, the panic had already begun. Meghan, sources say, wasn't strategizing. She wasn't posturing, she was pleading. Because this wasn't tabloid noise. This was paperwork with teeth. And the kind of paperwork that doesn't get filed unless every receipt is already printed, labeled, and timestamped. Let's rewind. Because this didn't explode overnight. It was brewing for years, hiding behind red carpets, gala smiles, and the illusion that Hollywood's elite all play on the same charitable team. They don't. Hollywood charity isn't about outcomes. It's about optics. Who you stand next to, whose jet you flew on, whose name appears close enough to yours that donors stop asking questions. And that's the game Archewell entered the second Harry and Meghan touched down in California. They didn't arrive humbly. They arrived wrapped in royal residue, global headlines, and instant relevance. And at first, it worked beautifully. They were photographed with the Clooneys. They stayed at Clooney Properties. George defended Meghan publicly, even invoking Princess Diana, a comparison so radioactive it practically glowed. And when George Clooney speaks, donors listen. When Amal Clooney stands nearby, legitimacy is assumed. That assumption, that's where the trouble began. Because in philanthropy, assumption is currency. You don't need to say we're partners if everyone already believes you are. You just need proximity, silence, suggestive language, a logo here, a name drop there. According to the lawsuit, Archewell knew exactly how that game worked. No contracts, no signed collaborations, but plenty of implication. By 2022, the confusion had reached donor inboxes. Guests at Archewell linked events started asking an uncomfortable question. So how exactly are you and the Clooney Foundation working together on this? There was just one catastrophic problem. They weren't. No partnership, no agreement, no shared campaign. Yet materials were circulating that read like there was. Clooney Foundation initiatives were referenced casually. Their work folded into conversations as if it were shared ground. At one fundraiser, Archewell distributed materials that blurred the lines so seamlessly, donors assumed alignment without a second thought. And donors always assume legitimacy, because no one expects a foundation to imply an alliance without permission. That assumption, the lawsuit claims, was exploited. Archived versions of Archewell's website later showed the Clooney Foundation for Justice listed as a like-minded organization in global justice efforts. No disclaimers, no clarifications, just proximity weaponized. Inside Clooney Foundation circles, tolerance snapped into alarm. This wasn't just sloppy branding. This was credibility contamination. And that's when Amal Clooney stepped in. Not emotionally, not publicly, but surgically. This lawsuit is ice cold. No flowery language. No celebrity tantrums. Just legal terms that hit like blunt instruments. False endorsement, unfair competition, marketplace deception. Translation? You used our name to move money. And here's the part no one can spin away. The Clooney Foundation didn't send a cease and desist. They didn't ask quietly for edits. They didn't leverage favors. They sued. Because by the time this reached Amal's desk, the damage wasn't hypothetical. It was provable. Emails, metadata, donor affidavits, trademark registrations. This wasn't a guess. It was a case. Money had already moved. High net worth donors, tech executives, entertainment power brokers. Funds had been redirected, not because Archewell outperformed the Clooney Foundation, but because donors believed they were aligned. One affidavit describes a seven-figure pledge redirected after an event where Archewell banners placed Clooney Foundation logos nearby, visually suggesting endorsement. Another donor recalls solicitations referencing aligned justice leadership, language reasonably interpreted as Clooney-backed. By the time clarifications happened behind the scenes, the money was gone. Forensic accounting cited in the filing reportedly traces a measurable drop in Clooney Foundation pledges that coincided directly with overlapping outreach. That's not gossip, that's math. And this is where the story turns dark. Because false endorsement law isn't about bruised egos, it's about market harm. In this space, credibility is the product. Archewell didn't need to eclipse the Clooneys, they just needed to stand close enough to absorb the glow. Hollywood noticed. And Hollywood doesn't cancel loudly, it withdraws. No invitations, no mentions, no callbacks. Suddenly, absences became conspicuous. The Sussexes weren't at the Albie Awards, the Clooney Foundation's flagship event. That omission wasn't an oversight. It was a message. George Clooney's public tone had already shifted years earlier. The once defensive ally now shrugged with a distant "I don't know her," a sentence that echoed louder than any insult. Behind closed doors, donors stopped asking about causes and started asking about risk. The illusion is already broken, and the reckoning has only just begun. What happens after the illusion shatters is always uglier than the break itself. Because once the lawsuit became public, it wasn't just lawyers who started digging. It was donors, board members, power brokers who suddenly wanted distance, fast, quiet, and permanent. Phones stopped ringing, invitations evaporated, and behind the manicured hedges of Montecito, the mood reportedly turned desperate. This wasn't the kind of crisis you spin your way out of with a podcast episode or a glossy statement about misunderstandings. This was structural, existential, the kind of problem that forces you to confront the one thing celebrity culture avoids at all costs: accountability. And Meghan knew it, because the moment discovery looms, narratives die. Every branding decision gets reframed as intent. Every vague phrase becomes a strategic choice. Every carefully curated silence starts to look calculated instead of classy. That's when the panic whispers turned into something more frantic. Sources close to donor circles say Meghan began reaching out, not publicly, not officially, but personally. Emotional conversations, long explanations. Appeals framed not around law, but around hurt, around feeling misunderstood, around intention versus perception. But intention doesn't matter in court. Paper remembers what people try to forget. And what's devastating here is that this lawsuit doesn't accuse Archewell of being incompetent. It accuses it of being clever, of understanding exactly how proximity functions in elite philanthropy and using it without permission. That's not naive. That's dangerous. Hollywood insiders describe a chilling shift after the filing. Not outrage. Not gossip-fueled outrage, at least. Just recalibration. People began quietly reviewing past donations. Boards asked compliance questions they'd never bothered with before. Sponsors started scrutinizing language, affiliations, and most telling of all, who else was involved. Because no one wants to be next. This case cracked something open that the charity world has relied on for decades. Ambiguity. The cozy gray area we're inspired by blurs into aligned with, where borrowed prestige quietly substitutes for measurable results. And that's why this lawsuit scared people. Not because of Harry and Meghan, but because it threatened the entire ecosystem. If this goes all the way, it forces a standard, and standards are terrifying in spaces built on vibes, galas, and Instagram sincerity. Behind the scenes, Archewell's advisors reportedly began pushing for containment, settlements, clarifications, damage control, anything to stop discovery from becoming a public autopsy. But here's the brutal truth no one wanted to say out loud. The Clooney Foundation didn't sue to negotiate. They sued to end something. Amal Clooney's reputation wasn't built on compromise. It was built on precedent. And precedent only matters if you enforce it when it's inconvenient. This wasn't personal. That's what made it lethal. Because while Meghan's camp reportedly leaned into emotion, the Clooneys leaned into documentation. Cold, clean, methodical, every implied connection mapped, every donor confusion logged, every financial shift traced. And once that machine starts moving, it doesn't care how sympathetic your story is. Meanwhile, the social consequences deepened. Power couples who once posed happily with the Sussexes now kept their distance. Not dramatically, just enough to be unmistakable. Group photos rearranged, seating charts subtly altered, names no longer mentioned in the same breath. Hollywood didn't exile them, it ghosted them. And ghosting is worse, because there's no confrontation to fight back against, just absence. This is where Meghan's pleas for help reportedly took on a sharper edge. Not begging, bargaining, trying to remind people of shared history, shared causes, shared values. But shared values don't override shared risk. And the risk here wasn't just legal, it was reputational contagion. Because if donors believed they were misled once, they'd assume negligence everywhere else. That's how trust collapses. Harry, sources say, was furious, not just at the lawsuit, but at the realization that the royal safety net he'd walked away from had been replaced with something far less forgiving. In monarchy, mistakes get managed. In corporate philanthropy, they get monetized and litigated. There's no crown to hide behind here, just balance sheets and emails. And then there's the quiet fear no one wants to say out loud. What if this isn't the only blurred line? What if discovery reveals a pattern? That's the question keeping advisors awake at night. Because once one implied partnership is exposed, every adjacent association gets re-examined. That's how dominoes fall. This is no longer about one lawsuit. It's about whether Archewell can survive a world where proximity no longer substitutes for proof. Because here's the unspoken reality: post-royal relevance was always fragile. It depended on credibility borrowed from institutions bigger than the brand itself. Once those institutions push back, there's nothing left to lean on. The Clooneys, meanwhile, haven't said much because they don't need to. Their silence is disciplined, strategic, almost surgical. They've already done the loudest thing possible: filed. And filing changes everything. As 2026 approaches, the pressure only intensifies. Discovery deadlines loom. Motions stack up. Private conversations start sounding like potential exhibits. Every email now feels radioactive. Settlements may come, apologies may be drafted with exquisite care, but even if this ends quietly, the damage won't reverse. Because the illusion that celebrity alone can anchor philanthropy is gone. This case ripped the curtain back and exposed something raw: that credibility isn't transferable, proximity isn't permission, and goodwill isn't infinite. For Meghan, this isn't just about winning or losing in court. It's about whether her post-royal identity can survive without borrowed authority. For Harry, it's the brutal realization that walking away from an institution doesn't mean escaping its protections, it means losing them. And for everyone watching, this is the moment celebrity charity stopped being untouchable. Truth doesn't trend, it files. And once it does, there's no filter strong enough to soften the fallout.